Right, for further analysis, let's now speak to Guy Leitch, who is the editor of SA Flyer magazine. Guy, good evening. Thank you very much for your time tonight here on In Focus. Is it possible to be able to predict these things well in advance in terms of where those flights are going to be at what time?
Well, yes, Linden is exactly right in that, of course, we can predict the actual schedule of flights because that's what they are. They're scheduled well in advance. However, I very seldom disagree with them, but I'm going to disagree with them now. I think that this wasn't entirely preventable. We had a storm or very bad weather that's delayed this current tanker by 9 days. And the entire world's logistics and transport system is in such a fine balance, it's a part of state, if you like, that any small disruption can cause a major knock-on disruption. Yes, it's true that South Africa produces very little of its own jet fuel these days. In fact, Cape Town gets all its jet fuel imported. And it's also true that we do stockpile fuel, or we store between 7 and 14 days worth of fuel at the airports normally. But given the amount of demand we've seen from the rapid return of airlines to long-haul flying, and just to almost pre-COVID levels, I think that it's taken the entire industry by storm. And then, of course, we've seen massive global disruptions on top of this all, like the Nova Stream pipeline sabotage. That's going to put further pressure on oil supplies and ultimately paraffin supplies, which is what Jet A1 is. So I think that the airports, or rather AXA, has in a sense been caught out by a problem not entirely of its own nature.
Yeah. Guy, I was actually going to come to that. I don't think it's the first time that we are seeing this jet fuel shortage situation. I think we were in a similar situation earlier in the year, and that's where I heard this explanation that we do have contingency of 7 to 14 days of stocked up jet fuel. So what could have happened there? Would it be a case of poor planning?
Well, so for the 7 to 14 days stockpile was exactly what there was, and the ship was 9 days late. So the airports company said, well, we need to really ration fuel. That meant that the domestic carriers were, as you heard, tankering fuel by carrying enough fuel out of Johannesburg to get to Cape Town and then go back again. That is very inefficient and very expensive to do, to carry 4 tons of fuel extra all the way up to 38,000 feet just for the sake of being able to get back. Very expensive, but even worse for the international carriers, the long-haul carriers like the Uniteds and Deltas who come all the way from the United States. They arrive with absolutely minimum fuel in their tanks because it's at the maximum range of the aircraft. So they have to be able to fill up with 100 tons of fuel to go back. And the moment there's any rationing or any question about them being able to get back, then they're just going to cancel flights, as we've already seen. And I should just point out that this causes massive knock-on effects, not just in the airline industry, but in the entire tourism industry. Think of all the hotel bookings that have been cancelled.
Yeah, that's the cost factor I want to talk about. I mean, I saw one article saying that passengers need to arrive a little bit earlier because of this question of the unavailability of jet fuel. What was the impact on the cancellations?
Well, again, we need to separate domestic, regional, and long-haul flying. For domestic flying, it makes sense because some airlines who fly 4, 5, 10 times a day between Johannesburg and Cape Town are able to consolidate flights. They're put on a bigger aircraft in the case of SAA, or simply combine 2 flights, spread the passengers over that. That's okay during the week, but we're already finding the surviving domestic airlines operating at 100% capacity anyway. The real problem remains internationally for needing to check in 4 or 5 hours in advance, because there's also been a logjam. That one was entirely preventable, with ground handling, with passport and immigration facilities, baggage handling, and so on at airports, particularly Amsterdam Schiphol and London's Heathrow, which have experienced major delays. But because the whole system is under so much pressure, it makes a lot of sense for all passengers to build as much slack into the system, if you like, by arriving as early as possible for flights.
Maybe the next question would probably be a little bit more broader and not specific to this particular incident, but maybe even political or economical in its nature. Why are we not producing our own jet fuel at the capacity that we need?
Well, we are producing jet fuel out of Sasol, but that all goes via a pipeline to our chamber. The simple reason is that the economies of scale no longer make it cheaper to refine your own jet fuel here, but rather it's cheaper to import it. We must also understand that this current shortage in Cape Town is not the fault of AXA, the airports company. It's really the fault of the individual or the private fuel suppliers, the Shells, the BPs, the Totals, etc. Those are the actual suppliers that provide the fuel and store it. So, it's important to understand that there's a relatively broad range of options all coming together to limit the particular picture at this stage. And I'm most inclined to blame the global logistical problems for it.
Yeah, is in that broad range of issues an option of having more than one supplier?
Very much so, but there is more than one supplier. There are at least 4 or 5 suppliers of jet fuel to Cape Town. So, as I said, it's not the fault of AXA and it's not the fault of one supplier. It's a global problem that is affecting all suppliers. And I have to just perhaps inject a note of sobriety or reality into this discussion by pointing out that I feel that the situation is going to get worse. You know, we're heading into the European winter, where oil demand peaks even further. So there'll be even less incentive for the fuel production companies to divert jet oil all the way down to Cape Town or South Africa when there's such demand in Europe and in North America.
Leitch, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for coming on. Aviation expert and editor of South African Flyer magazine. They're looking at that situation with the shortages in jet fuel. Now we do hear that some of the much-needed fuel has landed, with some vessels carrying jet fuel already having docked. So that situation expected to improve.